Hello, everyone, and good evening. I can't join you tonight, so I'm going to be presenting chapters 4 and 5 of the book Mismatched remotely via recording. So I appreciate your time, and I will get started. So, chapter 4, it starts out with John R. Porter's bedroom. Porter is a PhD designer from the University of Washington's Human-Centered Design and Engineering program. Better than most people, Porter can tell you how to create an inclusive solution. Technology is very tightly integrated with everything he does. He uses a wheelchair to get around and assistive technology to extend his own abilities. These technologies help Porter bridge the mismatched designs that he encounters when using everyday objects and spaces. In a world where most technology is designed to be used with a keyboard, mouse, or touchscreen, Porter depends primarily on speech recognition. He uses his voice to interact through a software called Dragon. Dragon listens and follows his commands. Porter ties his experience with gaming to everyday life, making insightful connections between play and inclusion. He keeps a wall of what he calls a wall of exclusion, and it contains video game controllers that we've all used throughout our childhoods, and he discusses them to remind him about how unintentionally exclusion can be included in something. For example, video game controllers are built for two hands. The games assume you'll be able to use your hands for interaction. There's a natural inclination to use yourself as a shortcut to make assumptions about the people you are designing for. The power of shifting who makes something has had a similar effect in industries beyond gaming. More designers are focused on adapting objects to work for a diversity of people. The cycle of exclusion shifts towards inclusion when more people can openly participate as designers. With this in mind, let's take a closer look at 3 skills of successful inclusive designers. First, they identify ability biases and mismatched interactions between people and the world. They create a diversity of ways to participate in an experience. They design for interdependence and bring complementary skills together. I was thinking about a speaker during the Design Foundations class who was talking about bathroom design, right? And it's okay to have gender-specific bathrooms as long as you have another bathroom that is not gender-specific, right? So it's creating a diversity of ways to participate in that experience, and that's what we as inclusive designers need to think about. Many organizations create solutions for thousands, if not millions, of people. This means thousands of designers and engineers bring their biases to the process. The underlying challenge is human diversity. Ability is one of the few categories that transcends all other types of human diversity. Human ability, in its many physical, cognitive, and societal forms, is a building block of design. A person's capabilities and limitations are always a factor in how successfully they interact with a solution. An ability bias is a tendency to solve problems while using our own abilities as a baseline. When we do so, our solutions end up working well for people with similar abilities and in circumstances, but can exclude a wider group of people. Think about all the ways in which any digital technology or website only works with a mouse, and how people who designed it didn't think, oh, I need to consider a keyboard. That's a great example. Mismatch interactions can also arise when we create solutions with only one way to participate. Example, a controller that requires 2 thumbs. Inclusive designers can create a multitude of ways for people to participate in and contribute to an experience. Inclusive design doesn't mean you're designing one thing for all people as in universal design. You're designing a diversity of ways to participate so that everyone has a sense of belonging. Inclusive design, a methodology that enables and draws on the full range of human diversity. Most importantly, this means including and learning from people with a range of perspectives. Universal design is one size fits all. Inclusive design is one size fits one. Making accessibility accessible. 4 unique challenges that people commonly face when they're new to accessibility. 1. Lack of educational resources. Accessibility fundamentals are rarely taught in schools or by employers. Complex legal verbiage. Accessibility focuses on legal standards. The language can be intimidating. Finding the signal in the noise. We need better ways to validate inclusive solutions are working as intended in the real world. a highly manual process. The tools for checking accessibility haven't kept pace with technology. Where I work, we tackled this as well by bringing in DQ University. DQ is an accessibility vendor. So this kind of helps to tackle these things by bringing in some automation and some education. I'm just sharing that as an example because this is true. Accessibility fundamentals are rarely taught. I have to train developers all the time how to code accessibly, and I have to provide them resources in order for them to upskill and learn. So this is a great way to really consider in any organization making accessibility more accessible. Chapter 5, With and For. After completing the necessary education, the credentialing process requires years of experience and thousands of dollars to complete. Then who can process can take 12.5 years on average, with public safety at stake. This makes sense, in contrast to the industry of video games, where open source platforms are making it easier for anyone to become a game designer. It is hard to imagine the same thing happening in architecture. This makes the role of an architect a useful lens to examine how we make. In addition to business criteria, the technical requirements, a design is shaped by the history of events that precede it. This means that shifting a cycle of exclusion towards a cycle of inclusion isn't simply a matter of designing an object in new ways. We also need to disrupt momentum of how things have been done for a long time. This is the status quo bias. In 2015, Detroit became the first U.S. city to be named a UNESCO City of Design. The distinction is an acknowledgement of the city's rich architectural heritage and a long list of influential local architects and designers who defined American modern design. In the early 1900s, Detroit was a beacon of economic prosperity, especially for African Americans. The city's population exploded from less than 500,000 in 1910 to over 1.5 million in 1930. Many of the new residents were African American migrants from the South. Over the course of the decline of the local automotive industry, the nationwide recession in 2008, and the city declaring bankruptcy in 2013, more than 1 million people left Detroit, likely to never return. Urban planning and architecture played a role in this decline. Neighborhoods were demolished in the 1960s to make way for the Chrysler Freeway, and a new mixed-income neighborhood designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The thriving center of Detroit's African-American community was destroyed, and most Black Bottom residents, and Black Bottom is a neighborhood in Detroit, were forced to move to public housing projects across the city. The Brewster Homes, which later grew to become the Brewster Douglas, was the first federally funded housing project in the United States. The stark, cramped design of these 20-story block-shaped towers was a far cry from their original townhomes. The style of the Douglas Tower was typical in the rising modernist movement in architecture that borrowed heavily from a vision set by Swiss architect Charles-Édouard Jeanneret-Gris, known as Le Corbusier. His concept of the towers in the park was just one example of his mathematically precise approach to architecture, based on béton brut, French for raw concrete. Le Corbusier's approach to architecture made a strong impression on Robert Moses, a man known as the master builder of New York City in the mid-20th century. He was also demonstrably racist. Moses built extensive parks, beaches, roadways, and bridges that transformed New York City during decades of his tenure as an appointed public official. One of the practices that Moses embraced, in the footsteps of Le Corbusier, was to demolish what he deemed blighted areas. Displacing over 500,000 residents in pursuit of his vision, he would raze entire neighborhoods to the ground, creating a blank slate for new housing projects and expressways. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Congress allocated fewer and fewer funds to building and maintaining high-quality public housing. As they did, the design quality declined. This led to the building of Douglas Brewster falling into disrepair. Tiffany Brown, an architectural designer and Detroit native, supervised the 2014 demolition. Racial and distribution in Detroit is sharply segregated along roadways and waterways, which are shown in white in this map. The population of the area is in gray, is over 80% African American and closely follows the boundaries of the city of Detroit. The population of surrounding areas, shown in black, is over 80% Caucasian American. The Brewster Douglas demolition held special meaning for Brown because the complex shared a lot of traits with her childhood home, Herman Gardens, which was several miles away. Many displaced residents, including Brown's own grandmother, returned to live in a small cluster of new homes at the edge of the former Gardens site. Brewster Douglas was built for low-income African-American families. Who chose to tear down and what to rebuild? What was their cultural agenda? Its construction and deconstruction happened without any meaningful inclusion of residents. This practice isn't isolated to architecture. It happens in many areas of design, including digital environments. When we break from the past, how we get to the next stage is an impact on who can move forward with the progress and who's left out. What does it take to shift long-standing cycles of inclusion? Tiffany Brown co-founded the Urban Arts Collective, an organization that uses art, music, and interactive workshops to introduce minority students to architecture and design. Her most recent initiative, 400 Forward, is aimed at empowering the next 400 African American female architects. How does a designer shape inclusion? She says that she would sum it up with the Latin expression, and I'm going to mispronounce this, nihil de nobis sine nobis, or nothing about us without us, which was made prominent by the disability rights movement. The phrase personifies the idea of designing with a community. That no course of action should be decided without people affected by that course of action, especially groups of people who have been socially excluded, categorized by disability or cultural heritage. What's your approach to inclusion? She says, I need to take the time to get to the root of the problem before I can try solving it. I have to see the big picture and how things flow together. I also find meaningful connections by meeting with people who are going to be affected by the design. How do you make design accessible? I want to make architecture and design feel reachable for kids in neighborhoods like the ones I grew up in. This includes them engaging with someone who's from the same type of neighborhood, someone who has defeated the same odds they face and became successful. When she describes inclusion, Brown focuses on the greater context. The historical moments that led to an existing design, the orientation between designers and users, the leaders who initiate wide-sweeping changes. Above all, her lens highlights the key to making inclusive solutions, including the expertise of excluded communities. When people are excluded by mismatched design, they grow familiar with the nature of the exclusion and how it might be resolved. Given the opportunity, they can apply this expertise towards building inclusive solutions. And with that, I will hand it over for Chapter 6.